The morning sun stretched long shadows over the mining platforms of New Geneva as Colonel Jake Martinez made his way through the bustling colony. Children darted between the habitat domes while their parents labored at the mineral extraction sites. For 30 years, the colony had known only peace since humanity first claimed Kepler 442b. Jake paused to watch a group of kids playing with toy starships near the central plaza, their laughter ringing off the crystal formations that made this planet priceless to Earth. In her lab, Dr. Lisa Hughes was reviewing daily reports when the first anomaly appeared on her screens. Energy readings showed something enormous approaching the outer system. She frowned. No scheduled arrivals were due for another month. The data was unlike anything she had ever seen. Whatever was heading toward New Geneva was massive and moving at incredible speed. Captain Alex Stone received the alert aboard his orbital defense platform. His modest fleet of 6 patrol ships was built for skirmishes with smugglers or raiders, not this. The incoming signatures revealed 12 colossal vessels, each dwarfing any human-made craft. Alex immediately contacted Dr. Hughes for more details on the mysterious fleet. The colony, now home to over 2 million residents across hundreds of settlements, thrived on its mining economy. Families had built lives amid the crystal fields. Schools taught about Earth while preparing children for life among the stars. Agricultural domes sustained the population, and research stations probed the strange crystal's properties. New Geneva stood as a beacon of humanity's reach across the galaxy. Lisa ran additional scans on the advancing ships. Their technology was unlike anything in human records. Their energy patterns hinted at weapons and defenses far beyond human design. Attempts to open communication failed. The fleet continued its direct course toward New Geneva, silent and unyielding. Jake was reviewing security reports when Lisa's urgent call came through. Her voice trembled as she described the unknown armada, 12 massive ships closing in with no response to any hail. Jake ordered a colony-wide alert. Emergency protocols triggered instantly as families sought shelter. Alex maneuvered his patrol ships into position between the planet and the incoming threat. His fleet looked fragile beside the towering vessels. He opened a transmission channel. Alex broadcast standard greeting messages in multiple languages, waiting for any kind of reply. The unbroken silence from the approaching fleet made his stomach tighten with dread. No peaceful visitors would ignore every attempt at communication. Without warning, the 12 ships suddenly appeared within the system. Their technology let them move faster than human sensors could detect. In that instant, Alex understood. These weren't just unidentified ships. They were vessels from an advanced alien civilization. The ships were sleek and dark, radiating power so intense his instruments screamed with overload warnings. Lisa stared at her monitors in disbelief as the alien formation shifted into attack posture. There was no message, no demand, no hesitation, only weapon systems coming online. She transmitted an emergency signal to Earth, knowing it would take weeks to arrive. Moments later, the first beam of energy struck Alex's defense platform. Blinding green fire ripped through his shields like tissue, annihilating 3 patrol ships in an instant. Alex managed to send one final transmission before his vessel disintegrated around him, a desperate warning to the colony below. Jake heard his friend's last words and felt his veins freeze. The orbital defenses were gone, erased in seconds. He triggered the full-scale evacuation alarm as the alien fleet descended into the atmosphere. Families sprinted toward the underground shelters while parents carried terrified children in their arms. Then the bombardment began. Gigantic energy blasts rained down from the 12 ships hovering over New Geneva. The first impacts obliterated mining platforms and research stations. Firestorms lit the horizon as decades of human effort vanished in an instant. Lisa ran for the emergency shelters as buildings crumbled and shockwaves shattered glass around her. The aliens struck with terrifying precision, targeting every trace of human construction. Her laboratory erupted in flames only seconds after she escaped. The crystalline formations that had made the planet valuable to Earth remained untouched. Everything else was reduced to ash. Jake reached the main shelter and coordinated the frantic evacuation. Reports poured in from every district. Settlement after settlement was gone. The aliens offered no mercy, not to soldiers, not to children. Schools, hospitals, entire neighborhoods were vaporized with methodical efficiency. For 3 unrelenting hours, the alien fleet rained destruction upon the world. By the time it ended, 2 million people were dead, including 400,000 children. Families were incinerated in their homes. Others perished trying to flee. When the last beam faded, New Geneva was nothing but a smoldering ruin. The shining colony that had taken 30 years to build was now reduced to silence and smoke, reduced to rubble in a single morning. Soon after, the alien fleet transmitted a message toward Earth, spoken in flawless human language. Their demand was chillingly simple: unconditional surrender and tribute from every human world. At the Deep Space Monitoring Station near Jupiter, Admiral Grace Kelly received the transmission. Her daughter, Emma, had been a teacher at New Geneva Elementary. The broadcast displayed the ruins of the colony as alien voices echoed their ultimatum. Grace watched in silence as images of devastation filled the screen, the shattered remains of her daughter's home. The message was cold and absolute. The aliens called themselves the Galactic Council, declaring dominion over this entire region of space. Humanity was ordered to abandon all colonies and submit to their rule. Resistance, they warned, would mean the total annihilation of Earth itself. The transmission concluded with horrifying footage: charred bodies, destroyed shelters, and the lifeless faces of human families. Grace immediately forwarded the data to Earth's government while compiling her own assessment. This was no misunderstanding, no tragic miscommunication between civilizations. It was calculated genocide, an act of terror meant to break humanity's spirit before a shot could be fired in return. The so-called Council had murdered over 2 million innocents simply to prove their dominance. Across human space, the survivors who had been off-world when the attack occurred were paralyzed with grief and disbelief. Colonel Jake Martinez was among them, stationed aboard the orbital medical facility when the first blasts struck. From the viewport, he watched his world burn, his home, his family, everything he loved consumed in fire. Within hours, the Council's broadcast reached every human colony. Their ultimatum was repeated on every network, every screen, every station, a warning of what awaited those who resisted. But in their arrogance, the Council had miscalculated. They believed the destruction of one world would break humanity's resolve. Instead, the massacre of New Geneva ignited something far more dangerous: unity. The images of burning cities and dead children spread like a storm across the stars. What the Council intended as intimidation became a call to arms. Their attempt to crush humanity's will had forged a singular purpose: vengeance. In Earth's Strategic Command Center, an emergency session convened in utter silence. The only sound was the steady rhythm of breath as the leaders watched the footage from New Geneva. President Helen Carter sat at the head of the table, her expression carved from stone. The screen before her showed the burning ruins of the colony, homes, families, and dreams reduced to ash. The air in the room felt heavy with cold fury. General Ryan Brooks stood before the assembled officials, 3 folders in his hands. Each one contained a alternative response paths to the Council's assault. The first option proposed diplomatic negotiation via trusted intermediary species. The second called for a measured military strike aimed exclusively at Council combat facilities. The third folder bore a single ominous word stamped in red. Dr. Nathan Price had anticipated this moment for a decade. As director of the Shadow program, he had guided the creation of weaponry and technologies that were officially non-existent. The slaughter at New Geneva signaled the moment to disclose humanity's secret preparations. Project Prometheus was ready to move from theory into action. Commander Beth Sullivan projected holostar maps over the table, outlining Council space. Crimson markers showed known military bases, while thin blue vectors traced supply lanes. Beth had spent long years analyzing every facet of Council logistics. Her strategy would not be a blunt frontal attack, but a surgical dismantling of the enemy's war-making apparatus. The president surveyed each advisor before responding. Earth's reply to the New Geneva atrocity would shape humanity's place in the stars. A tepid reaction would invite further slaughter, while an excessive response could push neutral species into the Council's arms. The choice required absolute precision, because there would be no opportunity for correction. Nathan unsealed his top-level briefs and engaged the room's secure displays. What he prepared to disclose exceeded ordinary classification. Only a dozen officials across human space understood the full reach of the Shadow program. Today, that circle would widen to include all planners required to coordinate Earth's counter. The quantum offensive systems had been conceived after first contact with alien civilizations 20 years earlier. Human engineers quickly understood that conventional ordnance would fail against sufficiently advanced foes. The answer lay in manipulating matter itself at microscopic scales instead of relying solely on projectiles or directed energy. Beth presented Operation Reckoning as others examined her tactical overlays. The scheme was coldly rational. Rather than assaulting Council homeworlds directly, humanity would methodically dismantle their infrastructure from the periphery inward. Each strike would be chosen for maximal strategic effect while attempting to spare civilian populations where feasible. Captain Danny Wright volunteered to command the initial wave before details were fully disclosed. His squadron of prototype vessels represented half a decade of clandestine engineering. The ghost craft exploited quantum field dynamics to render them nearly undetectable while mounting destructive power sufficient to raise orbital complexes. Arrays of quantum cloaks diverted light and energetic signatures around the hulls, presenting empty space to enemy sensors, even as human warheads shredded their formations. The ships could materialize amid an enemy armada without warning and disappear again in an instant. Council scanners would report vacuum while human batteries carved the enemy to pieces. Carter then turned to Nathan, asking for assurances that Prometheus could be controlled and used without catastrophic consequences first. Ethical consequences of deploying such devastating arms. The quantum charges could undermine matter at its deepest levels, causing targets to simply vanish. There would be no warning and no opportunity to surrender. The Council would suffer the same remorseless erasure they had delivered to New Geneva. Beth stressed that the psychological blow mattered as much as the tactical strike. The Council had destroyed New Geneva to proclaim their dominance and cow humanity into obedience. Humanity's reply would demonstrate to the stars what transpired when human families were slaughtered. Terror would cut both ways in this war. General Brooks opened the third dossier and set its pages on the table. The Crimson File held authorization for unrestricted hostilities against the Council. Every arm in the human arsenal would be sanctioned, even systems never field-tested under combat conditions. The restraints were gone entirely. Danny examined the strike roster for the opening wave. 17 Council complexes across 9 star systems would be struck in unison. The operations would commence precisely 72 hours after New Geneva's annihilation. The schedule would clearly signal that humanity could hit anywhere without notice. The quantum devices functioned by destabilizing the nuclear force's binding matter. When triggered, they produced a cascading reaction that returned solid aggregates to their base atoms. Vessels and stations would simply dissolve, leaving no wreckage or trace explaining their end. The result was surgical, silent, and utterly conclusive. President Carter studied the intelligence on Council psychology and social structure. The aliens believed technological supremacy made them untouchable. They had never encountered an adversary capable of matching their arms or surprising them strategically. The shock of several installations disappearing without explanation would fracture their certainty. Nathan disclosed the last component of the scheme. Earth's quantum comms backbone could relay signals instantaneously across galactic distances. Every human world would synchronize its response at once. The Council would be assaulted on multiple axes, while their own lagging networks scrambled to coordinate countermeasures. Beth outlined the schedule for widening operations after the initial hits. Phase 2 would disrupt Council logistics and signal arrays. Phase 3 would neutralize their mobile strike forces. Phase 4 would strike at their core worlds. Each stage would ratchet up pressure while offering the Council chances to capitulate. The conference stretched for 6 hours as every point was probed and tuned. Charts were portrayed, weapons capabilities were cataloged, and fallback contingencies were drafted. The retaliation for New Geneva would become the greatest military mobilization in human memory. Every service branch would contribute vessels and personnel. Danny's Ghost Fleet comprised 30 craft engineered specifically for this campaign. Each ship carried a dozen specialists schooled in quantum weapons doctrine. The vessels could sustain autonomous operations for months without external supply, thanks to closed-loop recycling systems and compact fusion cores. General Brooks insisted civilian harm be minimized throughout the campaign. Humanity would show the contrast between their precise strikes and the Council's atrocity. Every target would be confirmed as a military asset before engagement. Refugee convoys and neutral stations would be shielded instead of hunted. The President inquired about possible allies among other alien races. Reports indicated several species resented Council hegemony, yet trembled before its forces. Successful human strikes might persuade those races to ally with an anti-Council coalition, or at minimum provide covert assistance, intelligence sharing, and sanctuary for displaced civilians while openly denouncing Council tyranny across diplomatic channels, and strengthen defensive pacts globally. kept matter bound together. When unleashed, they didn't explode in fire or debris. They simply erased everything caught within their field. There would be no wreckage, no survivors, no trace that the target had ever existed. Nathan reminded everyone of the weapon's only weakness, its staggering energy demand. Each discharge drained the ship's fusion reactors to critical levels, meaning the Ghost Fleet could only strike a few times before returning to base for recharging. Every shot had to be precise, every target worth the cost. As the meeting adjourned, President Carter rose, her voice calm but edged with steel. "The Council sought to teach humanity fear," she said. "Instead, they will learn the price of genocide." Earth's counterstrike would be deliberate, disciplined, and utterly devastating. The Ghost War was about to begin. Orders rippled across human space. Fleets mobilized, weapons were loaded, and crews prepared for what would become the largest coordinated offensive in human history. The Council had 72 hours to celebrate their so-called victory over New Geneva. After that, they would learn what it meant to provoke humanity's wrath. Captain Danny Wright monitored the Council command station on Zerion Prime through his ship's quantum sensors. The vast fortress housed 15,000 troops and served as a regional hub. In 30 minutes, it would be gone. He checked his chronometer, then engaged the quantum cloak. His vessel vanished from all detection, erased from sight and signal alike. Lieutenant Kelly Barnes guided her ghost ship toward the Beta Centauri communications relay, a massive array that connected Council fleets across 3 sectors. Without it, their coordination would collapse for weeks. She armed her quantum payloads and drifted silently toward the unsuspecting target. Inside the hub, alien operators monitored blank space, unaware that death was closing in. Across 9 star systems, 30 Ghost Fleet ships took up position. To Council scanners, the regions appeared empty. The aliens had no idea that humanity's invisible vengeance surrounded them. Their supposed technological superiority meant nothing now, against foes they could not detect and weapons they could not comprehend. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Zexrath reviewed post-attack reports from New Geneva when chaos erupted across his comm channels. Base after base was going dark. Zerion Prime had vanished, followed within minutes by 3 more stations in the same sector. There were no distress calls, no enemy readings, just silence and blank sensor fields. Danny's ship decloaked for a heartbeat, long enough to fire. Blinding quantum beams lanced across the void, unmaking the Council station molecule by molecule. Metal, glass, and flesh dissolved into atomic mist. 15,000 troops died without ever seeing their killers. Meanwhile, Kelly completed her infiltration of the communications hub. She downloaded critical intelligence, planted her charges, and transmitted the stolen data back to Earth. Her timer was set. 10 minutes until detonation. The station's destruction would appear to be an internal malfunction. At the same time, Major Sam Rodriguez, head of psychological operations, executed his mission. His ships decloaked briefly at each strike zone to broadcast a single haunting transmission. Footage of burning homes and dead families from New Geneva filled every Council frequency, followed by a single statement spoken in flawless alien dialect. "Admiral." Nathan convened an emergency war council as reports of the massive fleet buildup reached Earth Command. Humanity's Ghost War had devastated the Council's infrastructure, but the aliens were about to gamble everything on one final assault. Nathan's expression was grim as he studied the projections. 400 warships were assembling across multiple sectors, all heading toward Seoul. The Council was desperate to crush humanity before fear tore their alliance apart. The Admiral turned to his officers. "They think destroying Earth will break us," he said quietly. "But all they'll do is guarantee their extinction." Preparations began immediately. Every surviving ship in the Ghost Fleet was ordered to regroup for what would be the largest engagement since the war began. The fleet's engineers worked non-stop to recharge the quantum cores and rearm the weapons. Earth's orbital defenses were activated, and civilian populations were moved to underground shelters. The atmosphere around the planet buzzed with activity as thousands of smaller vessels ferried supplies and personnel between stations. Humanity had no illusions about the coming battle. The Council had chosen total war, and the ghosts of New Geneva demanded justice. Kelly's intelligence teams tracked every movement of the enemy armada. Their quantum sensors detected faint distortions in space-time caused by the Council ships' faster-than-light drives. The alien fleet was enormous, but their tactics were predictable. They believed in overwhelming force and centralized command, weaknesses humanity now knew how to exploit. Nathan's strategy was simple: lure the Council deep into the system, then strike from concealment. The Ghost Fleet would remain invisible until the perfect moment, turning the Council's confidence into chaos. When the enemy arrived at the edge of the solar system, they found no resistance. Their scouts reported empty space and quiet sensors. Admiral Zexrath, now commanding the entire assault, took the apparent silence as confirmation of human retreat. "Advance," he ordered. "Burn their world to ash." But the ghosts were waiting. As the fleet passed Jupiter's orbit, quantum signatures flared across the void. 30 invisible ships decloaked in perfect synchronization, unleashing energy blasts that tore through the alien vanguard. Vessels disintegrated in seconds, their molecular bonds collapsing under the quantum cascade. Before the Council could respond, the human ships vanished again, leaving only expanding clouds of atomic dust. Panic spread through their ranks. Their sensors showed nothing: no heat signatures, no drive emissions, only annihilation. Zexrath roared for counterfire, but there were no targets. His ships fired blindly into the darkness as ghost vessels struck from all directions. Communications broke down, command ships vanished, and entire wings of the fleet disappeared from the tactical grid. Kelly's infiltration teams used the chaos to transmit false orders, sending Council squadrons crashing into one another. Within hours, the Grand Armada that had been meant to destroy Earth was reduced to scattered wrecks and terrified survivors. When it was over, Nathan gave a single transmission to the remaining enemy ships. "The war ends now. Leave human space or share the fate of those who started it." Admiral Zexrath's flagship was the last to fall. Its reactors overloaded as quantum charges detonated within its core, dissolving the vessel into nothingness. The Ghost War had ended as it began, in silence and shadows. Humanity had not just survived. It had become a force the galaxy would never forget. Grace Kelly reviewed the incoming reports and allowed herself a cold, satisfied smile. The Council was about to learn that Earth had not been caught unaware. The Ghost War had achieved its chief aims. Council military strength lay in ruins, and the alliance that sustained it was fracturing. Where certainty had once ruled, dread now lurked in the leadership's halls. Still, the aliens would not concede defeat easily. They readied a final desperate gamble. Their plan: a direct strike on Earth to end the conflict by sheer force. Sam's last broadcast had reached every member world in Council space. Its tone had shifted. Humanity had foreknowledge of the impending assault and stood prepared. The Council could capitulate and answer for their crimes, or they could press their attack and accept total annihilation. The clock ran down. High Counselor Vexani stood before the giant view screen as the assembled armada filled the display. 400 vessels from 6 distinct species had converged to carry out the assault. The greatest military concentration in galactic memory aimed to wipe out the human threat once and for all. The ghost strikes would cease only when Earth's cradle lay as radioactive ruin. Admiral Grace Kelly tracked the approaching fleet using the Sol system's far-reaching deep space sensors. Her Mars Command Center logged each incoming ship as they crossed into human space. From orbital readouts, Earth looked empty. No active fleets, no defensive arrays. The Council would interpret that blankness as surrender or evacuation. The Armada advanced in flawless formation toward the inner worlds. Vexani arrayed his mightiest hulls at the fore while sheltering less capable ships toward the center. His strategy was brutally simple: obliterate the Sol system and broadcast the images across the galaxy as a caution to any who might resist. Dr. Nathan Price observed the advance from his covert bunker buried deep beneath Earth's crust. Over the past 5 years, a single secret defense network had been built. Thousands of weapons platforms masquerading as asteroids and orbital detritus lay concealed throughout the system. Unwittingly, the Council was flying into the most elaborate trap humans had ever set. Their sensors registered no anomalies as they threaded the asteroid belt. The Council's tech could dissect the elemental makeup of each rock and shard, but it could not reveal the quantum field generators lodged inside hollowed asteroids. The belt was, in truth, a vast weapon array poised for activation. Captain Pete Johnson led Earth's home fleet from a flagship hidden in the shadow of Jupiter's largest moon. 200 human vessels lay under quantum cloak awaiting the signal to strike. The Council's numerical advantage would count for nothing when their forces found themselves encircled inside a meticulously prepared kill zone. Vexani broadcast his terms as the fleet closed on Mars orbit: unconditional surrender, immediate handover of military systems, and the scientists behind the quantum programs. Any resistance, he warned, would lead to Earth's total sterilization and the end of its colonies. Grace Kelly relayed the demand to Earth's government, then keyed the defense grid to life. President Carter's reply echoed on every frequency. The galaxy listened as humanity answered. Earth would not bargain with those who had practiced genocide. The Council would pay for their choices. At Nathan's command, the first quantum mines powered up as the Council fleet closed over the inner system, unaware of their impending and irreversible fate. The quantum devices attacked the forces that held atoms together. When triggered near a target, they propagated a cascade through solid matter like an infectious wave. Ships and orbital complexes simply unraveled at the atomic level, leaving no wreckage and no clues as to their destruction. Council commanders scrambled to comprehend the phenomenon. Sensor logs recorded nothing until the instant of annihilation. No weapon flashes, no drive emissions, no incoming signatures. Installations were vanishing as if some invisible hand had erased them from existence. Admiral Zexrath ordered emergency responses across affected sectors. Fleets raced to the coordinates only to find clouds of dispersed atoms where once proud stations had stood. Even the Council's most sensitive scanners could detect single molecules but found no hostile forces. They were fighting phantoms that struck without warning and melted away without a trace. Danny's squadron struck 6 additional targets in the Zarian system before pulling back. Shipyards, armories, command hubs, all dissolved by the same ruthless effect. In under 4 hours, a regional headquarters was reduced to scattered atoms. Decades of infrastructure collapsed as though it had never been built. Occupying ground forces reported identical assaults. Human vessels materialized, Shattered garrisons and supply depots then vanished. The strikes were surgical, aimed strictly at military nodes while leaving civilian zones intact. The message was unmistakable. Humans could strike anywhere, anytime. Kelly's infiltration cell breached a Council research complex to seize new weapons research. The ghost ships exfiltrated data and emplaced charges to erase years of development while delivering valuable intelligence to Earth. Fear multiplied faster than the Council's tactical responses. Accounts poured in of phantom ships appearing from empty space, striking with unerring accuracy, then dissolving like ghosts. Council crews began firing at sensor phantoms and shadow echoes. Terror itself became as deadly as any quantum warhead. Sam's transmissions looped across Council frequencies, showing New Geneva's ruined families and delivering a blunt ultimatum. You chose genocide. Militarized power will answer in kind. Every attack on civilians would be met by systematic destruction of military capability. The choice remained theirs. Within 3 weeks, the Council had lost 43 installations, a dozen supply convoys, and its primary intelligence backbone. Member species started questioning the wisdom of the New Geneva operation. Humanity's capabilities made Council tech appear antiquated. Some races quietly explored separate peace options. Council scientists labored desperately to devise counters, analyzing the molecular remnants from obliterated sites. Every test yielded the same baffling conclusion. Matter had been destabilized at the atomic level by a process that violated their physics. Captain Jenny Walsh intercepted urgent communications revealing panic among Council leaders. Member races demanded answers, and some threatened to withdraw unless the human threat was eliminated. The alliance that seemed invincible after New Geneva was beginning to splinter. Danny pressed deeper into Council space for Phase 2, disrupting logistics and communications. Convoys vanished between systems. Supply lines collapsed as isolated forces found themselves out of ammunition and vulnerable to unseen attackers. Quantum cloaks let human vessels penetrate the most defended systems. Homeworld militaries watched in disbelief as their fortresses were unmade by invisible hands. Rear areas once considered secure were suddenly expendable. In response, Council leadership resolved on a final gamble: annihilate Earth. 400 ships would mass for a decisive strike on the Sol system. Kelly's intelligence nets tracked the buildup and fed the data to Earth. They prepared for escalation. The Council would again target civilians as they had at New Geneva. Nathan convened an emergency command and revealed the Sol system's hidden defenses. Over 5 years, a covert grid of weaponized platforms, disguised as asteroids and detritus, had been emplaced. The attackers flew blind into a carefully set trap. As the Council armada closed, the asteroid belt's disguised quantum generators activated and began unraveling Council hulls. Ships dissolved where they stood. Formation after formation collapsed into atomic dust. Pete's fleet decloaked in unison, 200 vessels forming a lethal sphere that cut off every escape. Vexani watched his armada disintegrate. Vessels that had endured 1,000 battles melted like sugar. Admiral Zexrath tried to force a breakout, but quantum salvos caused entire wedges of ships to simply cease existing. The molecular bonds holding hulls together failed en masse. Grace observed the slaughter with grim resolve. Each wiped ship a measure of retribution for New Geneva's dead. For 4 hours, the Council fleet was methodically undone. Human tactics targeted command nodes first to fracture coordination. Once leadership collapsed, many ships surrendered rather than face molecular erasure. Vexani's flagship took repeated strikes until its bridge dissolved, and the High Counselor, architect of the massacre, was scattered into space. Council forces struggled to fathom how they had been led into so perfect a snare. Earth had appeared defenseless until the moment of annihilation. Human intelligence had tracked fleet movements long before. The Sol system had been refashioned into a weapon to break the Armada. Commander Lisa Torres broadcast unconditional surrender terms as the last pitched resistance failed. Reparations for New Geneva would be paid. The Council's current leadership would be dissolved and replaced. Continued resistance would be pursued to home systems. Trapped between human forces and still active quantum mines in the belt, surviving Council vessels had no route of escape. Continued fighting meant certain death. One by one, commanders sent surrender codes. Nathan compiled the battle data. Human losses were light, while Council casualties exceeded 70%. The defense grid outperformed projections. Saul became a tomb for Council ambitions. Pete organized capture operations, boarding surrendered ships, treating prisoners, and salvaging intelligence. Human conduct. Quantum weapons had been designed solely as a defensive measure against the overwhelming might of alien empires. The Council's unprovoked strike forced Earth to unveil power it had never wished to reveal. Brad presented chilling footage from New Geneva, documenting the systematic slaughter of human families. Children were incinerated in schoolyards by Council plasma fire. Parents died shielding their young as hospitals, and shelters were deliberately bombarded. The proof was irrefutable and horrific. The surviving Council species voted unanimously to dissolve their alliance and accept human oversight of their armed forces. The alternative, total annihilation, had already been proven possible. Survival triumphed over pride as one civilization after another surrendered. Ryan introduced the new Galactic Accords built on simple, unbreakable principles. Any race that committed genocide would face the full wrath of humanity's military power. Attacks on civilians would trigger the total destruction of the aggressor's forces. Peace would now be enforced through strength and the certainty of overwhelming retaliation. The Kresh delegation volunteered their vast industries to mass-produce human quantum defenses. Their foundries would forge weapons and shields for those who joined the alliance, creating balance through shared technology so no single power could dominate the stars. President Carter met privately with emissaries of races once enslaved by the Council. For centuries, they had been stripped of soldiers and resources to feed the Empire's conquests. Humanity vowed to help them rebuild, granting defensive autonomy to prevent future subjugation. The tribunal lasted for weeks as damning evidence was presented: genocide, forced labor, population relocation, and destruction of civilian worlds. The death toll from Council expansion spanned billions across hundreds of planets. Nathan briefed the Allied worlds on quantum defense arrays that could shield entire systems. These innovations would be shared only with peaceful species willing to sign mutual defense pacts. A network of united worlds would ensure no empire ever rose again. Brad coordinated human patrol fleets within former Council space. Ghost-class vessels patrolled the frontier, ready to intercept threats to civilian life. The same stealth technology that once shattered the Council would now safeguard the innocent. Under human supervision, the old fleets were dismantled and their armories destroyed. Planet-killer stockpiles were found and erased. The machinery of oppression was methodically converted to peaceful use. In the first week alone, Carter signed 12 mutual defense treaties, each one a promise of protection in exchange for cooperation and peace. This growing alliance made future wars nearly impossible. Colonel Jake Martinez arrived on Zentara bearing letters from the families of New Geneva's fallen. As the sole survivor of the colony's defense, he had become a living emblem of human resilience. His testimony reminded the galaxy of the terrible cost of arrogance. Billions watched as Council leaders were condemned for their crimes. The architects of New Geneva's destruction were sentenced to death, while others faced imprisonment or rehabilitation. Justice was swift but balanced, each punishment matched to its atrocity. Ryan oversaw the dismantling of shipyards and weapon foundries that once fueled the Empire. Those facilities were reborn as hospitals, schools, and research centers under human guidance. Admiral Grace Kelly founded the Memorial Garden on New Geneva's restored site. Quantum crystals engraved with 2 million names shimmered beneath alien suns, a timeless monument to the lost. The garden stood as a warning to any who dared harm human families. The reconstruction of New Geneva became a symbol of unity, former enemies working together to heal what tyranny had destroyed. Humanity's allies learned that true strength was not domination, but protection. When Carter addressed the galaxy at the tribunal's close, his message was clear. Earth's vengeance had never been about conquest but justice. Humanity's purpose was not to rule but to safeguard peace. The new galactic order would resolve disputes through dialogue, not destruction. Any species that targeted innocence would face the united fury of the human alliance. The galaxy finally understood why striking first against Earth was suicide. Jake stood in the memorial garden, eyes lingering on the etched names of his friends and family. Grace approached quietly, holding a letter from her daughter Emma's students, children who would never grow up, their laughter now immortalized in light and crystal. Around them, the surviving council species began rebuilding, tyranny replaced by democracy, oppression by cooperation. Strength, when wielded for protection, had proven greater than the strength used for fear.